If your ink's too slow and your nib won't flow, here's one of the places that you can go. Larry is here to see you through with Mr. Announcer and Cubby too. It's Larry's Fountain Pen Reviews.
Now, here we go. Okay, one more time. She's a lady. Come on, Tina. Whoa, whoa, whoa. She's a lady. Talking about a little lady. And Lannis is mine. Come on, all right. Is everybody ready to rock and roll? I have some really good shows today. A lot of fun with Mr. Kirk coming on today. Going to be talking about the nib, because he is the nib man. And I'm not going to say anything negative, but our good old friend Mike's here. Big. Hello, Michael. Don't cry, Mike. I'm an old guy, so you have to overlook me. Okay?
Hey,
I can get away with it. I'm just like, oh, I'm melting. But anyway. Okay, let's get started, folks. Welcome, Mr. Kirk. How you been? Welcome back to the show.
Hi, everybody.
She broke up.
Cool stuff you posted.
Thank you. Whatever that was.
Everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So, Mr. Kirk, how you been?
I've been well. Been busy.
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Let's see. The last time I saw Mr. Kirk was in Houston at Google. Is it Google? Trumbull.
Yep.
He was working on the nib thing, doing this nib thing, yeah. So this man traveled like all over the place doing his nib thing. And, you know, I never realized or knew what kind of work he does. So I finally asked, I know he does nibs, but, you know, his full-time job, and Mr. Kirk said, I do nibs. Wow. So this man does stay busy. So, hello, Mr. Dan Rouse. Hey, how you been? Oh, he's in shock.
Hey,
Dan's in shock.
Is it just on my end, or
He's on mute too?
You're sounding
Are you
very
there, Dan?
Yeah, his audio is breaking up pretty bad tonight.
Yeah, it sure
really
is.
distorted tonight.
Yeah.
I'm only picking up for
Yeah. I'm Larry. Yeah. Okay.
Kelly, can you? Is there anything going on his end? No, you're breaking up.
Well, we're going to get started again.
I'm not hearing,
good morning.
you either,
Hello,
Jay.
Mr. Georgie. So, Mr. Kirk.
Nothing is out of the ordinary. Let me.
Now I can hear you.
I am.
You did. That's better now, Jay.
Yeah, I'm on his computer. Looks like our Wi-Fi signal is a bit low.
Okay.
Hey, Doc. How you doing, bud?
Good, Larry. Good.
Good morning, Doc. How you doing?
Sure we
Evening,
hear
I
you.
mean.
Okay.
Whatever day it is. Hello. Can you hear me, Doc? Good.
I can hear you
Don't
now.
forget to make sure.
Dan,
Yeah,
is it
I'm kind of here, I guess. Wherever
Dan,
here
is
is.
for any
Okay,
better?
Mr. Kirk. I am past breaking up. Breaking up still. Well, anyway, okay, Kirk. Are we breaking up to y'all out there? Doc is breaking up still. Dan, are you breaking up still?
I'm hearing you a little tiny bit better.
Yeah, I'm hearing you good. How about you, Doc?
I think there's a big
I
delay.
hear you okay. You're a little distorted, but it's the best we're going to be able to do.
Yeah.
Okay, say something, Jake, so they can hear you.
I'm on the same microphone.
Oh, same mic? Okay.
Yeah.
That's it. Michael, you're okay. We tested you already, and Frank. Land's okay. I think Teen's okay. So let's get started, folks. Okay, one more time. I'm sorry, Frank. Kirk. So, Kirk is the nib guy. He travels all over the place. You think he would be kind of gypsies, tramps, and thieves with the nib thing. So that's his thing. So if you don't mind, Kirk, give us a rundown on nibs and give us your opinion, your likes and dislikes, and the whys and the why nots. Take it away, Kirk. The show's yours.
Okay. Well, I mean, I don't know where to start specifically regarding nibs. I mean, there's all kinds of nibs. There's steel nibs, gold nibs, palladium nibs, platinum nibs, titanium nibs. There's all kinds of nibs. So for the most part, the thing you're looking for is to actually have a well-tuned nib. If the nib is tuned well, it really doesn't matter too much what material it's made from. It can write very nicely. There are some caveats to that. There's a couple of nibs out there that definitely could stand to use better manufacturing techniques in order to make them more easily tuned or even better writing pens once tuned. I'm kind of just gonna open this up to questions about nibs and nib work and customs. I do a large variety of custom work.
Larry,
on
Kirk,
all nib
excuse me,
types.
Larry, if you don't mind, Kirk, why don't you tell us a little about who you are and how you got interested in grinding nibs?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'm Kirk Speer. I have a shop called Pen Realm online. I sell both new and pre-owned pens as well as inks and papers and all kinds of stuff like that today. That is my full-time job. About 7 years ago, I found my first fountain pen. I was out in the in the Four Corners area of Colorado, and I went into an antique store and found a Parker 51 for $5. I didn't know anything about it other than it was a fountain pen, and that $5 wasn't too much for me to risk to find out what fountain pens were all about. So I bought the pen, took it back to my hotel, and then researched it, and found out one that I could get it writing. It was an aerometric, so just getting the dried ink out, rehydrated and pushed out of it and put new ink in it, and it wrote. So that was pretty awesome. And then turns out they're worth more than $5. So that was a win-win. So from there, I just kind of went crazy and started buying every fountain pen I could find. And that's kind of where I got in trouble. I found, all these pens at the antique stores for, some of them were pretty cheap, but I found out there was a reason for that. So a lot of them needed nib work and stuff like that, or resacked and stuff. I learned how to resack and restore most of the pens that I bought, but the nib work was the one that kind of, eluded me a little bit. I started researching, who does nib work and, and everything. And the first thing I saw was that most of the guys out there, had one, a really long wait list, and two, some of them were not very clear on what they would charge, and I had these, Schaefers and Parkers that were maybe worth $50, and to get it repaired by them, as far as just the nib work goes, could have been $30 to $150. Super clear. I didn't want to send a $50 bill. And so I decided, well, maybe I'll see if I can do this myself. And, I found out that I was not too bad at it, and I started showing my work on social media, and people started noticing and saying, well, that's cool that you can repair nib, but can you do a custom grind? And I said, well, let me see. And so that's kind of where things really started to grow for me as a potential business in this industry. And so,
Okay, real quick, hold on for a minute there. What's the difference between a custom grind or a regular grind? Nothing?
So all grinds are custom grinds because you're taking an original shape of the nib and changing it into something else. So even if I'm making a broad nib into a fine nib, that's still a custom grind. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of an interesting way of saying that. But yeah, so a standard grind would just be what the factory produced. So if they send you a pen that's listed as a fine or a medium or a broad or even a stub, that would be a factory grind, or versus a custom grind, which is something that someone like me or Mark Bacchus or many others out there do.
How long does it take you to reshape a nib, tune a nib, to custom grind the nib, to make it into an oblique nib, those kind of things?
So most any custom takes me, typically less than 15 minutes, I'll say. I typically advertise that I can do 2 nibs per half-hour time slot at a pen show. So that, generally speaking, that allows, like I said, 15 minutes per grind. There's certainly occasions where I can do more than that, but that's kind of probably the general average. And the tuning, the grinding only takes, a minute or two of the process. So the tuning is actually the longer part of the process. So tuning and a custom grind plus tuning is virtually at the same time.
What kind of tool?
Larry, let me interrupt for a second. I'm getting a lot of feedback here. It might be your and Kelly's computer, Jake's computer near each other. But every time somebody says something, I'm hearing that back at me with a delay. So maybe just lower the volume of one of the two. I don't know, the two computers. I'm definitely getting a feedback. I can hear myself talking to somebody.
Okay, well, we'll try to see what we can do here.
All right, buddy. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not on.
Okay, get that on. It's just me. So
It's much better. Yeah, no
better.
feedback now.
That's better.
I didn't do anything. Okay. I'm glad it's better. It's corrected. That counts. Okay.
So I think the question was what kind of tools are involved?
Oh, yeah.
Bye. Thank you, Frank.
Somebody asked what tools are involved?
Yeah, when you're doing a nib.
Yeah, so for custom nib grind, you need some kind of grinding tool. There's quite a variety of tools that everybody's using. Probably the most basic and easiest to find is the Craftsman Dremel, or I think it's Craftsman, the Dremel tool. So that's kind of the cheapest and easiest base point. It's not the most precise device, so you're going to have to compensate for that with other means of trying to be accurate. And then probably the most common, more accurate machine is the Fordham bench lathe, which is essentially a two drum, kind of like a polishing wheel, so to speak. So you can put some smaller wheels on it to get more precise with working on nibs.
Is that like a bench grinder then?
Yeah, like a bench grinder. Yeah, I think if you get like the big 6 or 8 inch bench grinder, that thing's going to be a behemoth. But but these smaller ones are pretty good, 4 or 5 inch diameter.
Kirk, if you've ever seen the Mont Blanc video where they're doing their nibs, they have a special device. They put the pen or the nib unit into, and there's I guess steel atop the pen that keeps the nib from splaying as they gently grind it. Do you use anything like that, or is it just?
I don't use any other additional mechanical devices. I would love to have one of those machines.
Yeah, it's I guess it's a nib vise. I guess not that their nibs are that flexy, but look like a pretty handy unit.
Yeah, I think one of the things with the Mont Blancs though is that they tend to build in a little bit of baby's bottom in all their nibs.
Yeah, they're too smooth for me.
Right.
Absolutely. Excuse me.
Okay, here's another question for you.
I've got a question.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I'm going to assume that you can do architect grinds. And so when you do an architect grind, is it better to start with a broad nib or a medium nib? Which is better? Like if I'm going to send you one for you to fix, make into an architect, would you be happy to start with a broad?
Sure. So yeah, generally speaking, the bigger nib you have, the more variation you can create for it. So in all cases, the tipping material is always saved on a custom grind. Never take away all the tipping material and to expose the gold or the steel behind it. So that being said, if you have a broad nib, it's going to have the biggest line variation. However, some people write really small, and so I can actually do an extra fine architect if you have really small handwriting. So so you can use pretty much any nib for an architect, but to get that the biggest variation, you want a broad. And then bigger yet is the coarse nib from Platinum and Pilot, or the zoom nib from Sailor. That's kind of the ultimate architect, so to speak.
And what I was wanting to do is I was wanting to have an architect nib on, let's say, the regular way of writing, but then maybe you know, like sometimes you don't want to use an architect because like you having to write on cheap paper. So I was thinking about the possibility of on the back side of it, or when you write reverse, to have that as like a fine or an extra fine.
Right. Yep.
Could that be done?
That's absolutely, and that's actually what is most commonly done as an extra fine or fine. You know, one of the things you kind of don't necessarily want to do is, you know, you can make an excellent one-sided nib, or you can make a good two-sided nib. So if you try to make both sides right, you're gonna inevitably you're gonna have to sacrifice a little bit on both sides to get them both to work well. You know, that being said, you can, you know, sometimes they come out very nicely, but generally speaking, you know, my general recommendation is that if you want an architect, you know, get the architect and make sure that's perfect. And then if you want an extra fine, you know, or needle point or something like that, have a second pen that you can, you know, have access to. That's ideal. But yeah, I understand that sometimes the situations you only have one pen to bring to whatever, you know, event you're at or work or whatever. And so definitely you can have that reverse side tuned to write, you know, extra fine or fine. You know, you can't make it, if you make it a medium or broad, try to make it medium or broad, then you're going to sacrifice the line variation too much on the forward side. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. What I've done in the past is actually with an architect nib is held it at a different angle. Get it to write fine point, you know, because you can't do it for very long. If you're gonna write a whole paragraph, then it gets tiresome because you're not writing what you write.
Indeed.
Thanks, Kirk.
Of course.
Okay.
There was a question given to us by someone in one of the Facebook chat groups saying they're driving and they want to know what ink you were using, Kirk, when you were at the Atlanta Pen Show last weekend. They think it was an Ackerman something, but they don't know what it was you were using while you were tuning pens.
I was primarily using Ackerman Delft's Blue.
Delft's Blue. Okay, thank you.
I typically use Orochizuku inks.
Oh yes, very nice.
And then Ackerman inks for and Waterman inks for especially for vintage pens.
Thank you.
Question for you, Kirk. What is the hardest nib in your opinion to work with as far as you working on nibs?
The hardest nibs to work on are the soft nibs. So like a Pelican M1000 or you know, or anything that's already been modified to flex, you know, a Mont Blanc calligraphy nib, you know, stuff like that. So if the nib is really soft, what can happen if you're not careful is that you can inevitably, one tine is always softer than the other. If you've ever looked at a nib up close, you'll see that almost 99 out of 100 times that slit is not perfectly down the center. And so one side is always heavier or thicker than the other side. And so if you have a flexible nib and you start grinding and you're not careful, one side will lift up away from the grinder while the other side gets chewed away. So you can easily end up with you know, lopsided nib, and that's, you know, that's what you really want to be careful not to do. So as far as challenging nibs, that's where it gets the most challenging, is when they're flexible already.
Kirk, what's your most popular grind of all? Is it the Architect? That seems to be popular today.
Yeah, the Architect is definitely one of the most popular grinds that I do. I think my Architect in particular is a very forgiving Architect, and it's very easy to write with, you know, without having to be focused on your writing. And so I think that makes it popular. You know, I do a needle point, which is, you know, I make that for Esterbrook, as well as, you know, it's super popular in the planner community, where, you know, where people are writing on these traveler's notebooks that are really small, and they want to write, you know, tiny print. So that's been really popular. And then, you know, I do what's called a fude, which is, you know, something that, you know, Sailor had for years, and you know, just an upturned nib, and, you know, it makes like a paintbrush, and it's a lot of fun to play with. So that is, I've seen a lot more people doing that, you know, which kind of surprises me, because it's not exactly you know, a daily use nib, but I definitely see that a lot of people are just having fun with that.
For a steel nib, yeah, I would be worried about a gold nib, just because you're not writing on tipping, right? You're writing
right. Yeah, and Sailor did offer food nibs with gold, and I'm not a fan of that. I will do that on rare circumstances, as long as I know that the customer's aware that the gold is a wearing surface, and that it may not, you know, maintain that, you know, the custom that I made for them. So as long as they're aware of that, I will do it, but I try to make sure that I try not to do that, because I feel like anything I do should be a lifetime thing. And so that's not going to last a lifetime.
Kirk, when you make an Architect for someone, right? You ever get anybody who responds less than you know, happy about the nib? Because, you know, if I come from the world of calligraphy, and so there are, as you know, there are nibs where you have to maintain a certain angle, and just to be able to get them to really make full use of them. The Architect nib seems like something like that to me, where you'd have to maintain a certain angle of your grip. And if you come off that, you'll get a different variance. So anybody respond poorly to the Architect?
Yeah, and so, you know, that's kind of one of the things I make mine a little bit more user-friendly, so that if, you know, an Architect, like you said, it is a very angle-specific grind. And so if you write at a 45-degree angle, I'm going to cut it at a 45-degree angle, and then just very slightly round it, so that if you run up to 50 or 52 degrees, or maybe down to 40 degrees, it's not gonna grab the paper. However, some people really want that crisp line, you know, and so I can make it that way too. But definitely, if I do that, you know, sight unseen, or not watching your handwriting or anything like that, then we can end up with problems where I didn't match your writing angle specifically enough, you know, and then you struggle to write with it.
Where are you located, Kirk?
I'm in Colorado, but I'm everywhere. I was just in Atlanta. I'm in Houston. I'll be in Portland in 2 weeks, and, you know, so if you're in the contiguous 48, there's a pretty good chance I'll be in your area sometime of the year.
I'm from Canada, so.
Yeah, well, I might go to Scriptus in Toronto, but
coming up in October.
Huh?
Coming up in October.
That's right. Yep. Yeah, I've got a busy October. Colorado Pen Show is also in October, and Detroit, so I'll be doing those. So,
are you going to be doing the Dallas Pen Show, Kirk?
I will be. Yep, I'll be in Dallas.
What about San Francisco?
Be in San Francisco. All the biggest ones I'll definitely be at. Huh?
I said you do get around. You're a traveling man.
I do. I think there's 18 shows in the U.S. and I typically do 16 of them a year.
Wow.
Are you coming to Chicago?
I'll be in Chicago.
Mhm.
Okay, Kirk, do you get very many bent nibs? If so, is it really hard to straighten that back out like it should be?
It, it varies, some of them can be bent pretty badly, and, probably the hardest ones to repair and the most often bent ones are the Lamy 2000 and the Pilot Vanishing Points. So those are, if you know them, they're really tiny nibs and they're really hard to work on. That being said, I don't know that I've ever had one that I couldn't repair. Where it gets more risky is when it's an extra fine nib on a soft nib or a vintage, like an old Parker, an old Schaefer, or an extra fine Sailor, something like that, where if it's been really mangled, getting the nib all the way back into shape without that tipping popping off is definitely a risk, and it's definitely can be hard to do. So those are the most the ones that I preface saying that I'll do my best, but I can't guarantee if it's too bad. But, really, most of the time they're fairly simple, and actually more often than not, it's when somebody tries to fix it themselves first that makes it a lot harder to repair. So I try to avoid temptation. If it would be my advice, if you're not experienced repairing nibs, don't try it on the Mont Blanc or the Sailor you just dropped. I charge only $30 for repair because I don't want to take advantage of people's misfortunes.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, you fixed my vanishing point that some years ago that accidentally rolled off the table when I was at Starbucks cement floor, and it bent it. So I sent it to you, and yeah, it came up fine, no problem at all.
Good.
I was kind of worried about it. That's my little sweetie vanishing point, but it's well and healthy. Here's another one for you. Let's talk about Mont Blanc nibs. Are they difficult to repair, and are they a favorite of yours to repair? Because sometimes if they're not, do you have to pay for it if you damage it or can't fix it because back to like it was?
Yeah, so I mean, if the work that I did is the reason that the nib got, was ruined, say somebody asked me for a custom grind and I cut the tipping off because my cat run under my feet or something like that, then absolutely I would pay whatever it costs to get, Mont Blanc to send me a new, well, Mont Blanc won't send me nothing, but I would, send the pen out to Mont Blanc to get a new nib and everything, or whatever, whatever the customer wants to do, I will pay those costs to get that, to get it rectified. As far as repairing Mont Blancs, they're pretty straightforward to repair. In fact, they're not too often that I come across damaged Mont Blancs nibs. It seems reasonably rare. I think people, when they get to that price point of pen, I think they exercise a little bit more care and attention to it, and so I don't see a ton of them. Probably the most common ones are the smaller, cheaper ones, the Boems and the 144s and stuff like that, where you can, more easily damage the nib, I guess.
Back on nibs again, let's talk about the extra fine on up. Let's go back a little bit on that. There are some people that like, is it triple extra fine? They really like that needle point nib, and they take it beyond just the regular extra fine or even a needle point. They like it even more than a needle point. How can you even write with it?
Well, some people have very, very light handwriting. It's definitely a dedicated practice to write so lightly that some of those needle, ultra needle points. I have one that's called the tetanus, and it's a 0.15 or smaller millimeters. So it's very, very small, comparable or even smaller than the Sailor Sabatogi and others that you may have heard of. But yeah, you just have to have a super light hand,
Wow.
and you can write with it. I actually enjoy writing with extra fine and ultra extra fine points. So I do a lot of them for myself as well as for those that want them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Kirk,
Dr.
How long did you say you were in business?
Fine. Say again, please.
I was asking Kirk how long he's been doing this.
How long have I been doing this?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been doing custom work for about 6 years now, and I just went full time with this business on March 1st, 2020.
So how do you get all of the experience with so many different nibs and that kind of thing to be able to perfect your craft, so to speak?
Yeah, so at first it was just see and copy. Nobody. I'm in Colorado, so there's no nibmeisters or anybody else to train me here. So what I did is I actually had some friends that had custom grinds from my Masayama, Mark Bacchus, and stuff like that, and they sent me the custom grinds so I could look at them and study them. And then I bought hundreds of Chinese steel nibs that were 3 for $1 or whatever. And so I just went to town on those and just started customizing until I felt like I had the process for each specific grind down. So I didn't offer every grind all at once. I waited, as I felt competent at each grind, then I started offering them. Obviously and I did it in scale. I didn't offer to customize your Mont Blanc 149 the first day I learned how to do a stub. So if you wanted to get a Jinhao from me with a custom stub, I would do that for you. And so you'd be into it for $30 with a pin and all, and it wouldn't, or maybe even less sometimes. And so it just, start out until, I got enough feedback and verified that people are happy with what I'm doing and like the way, both the way it looks and the way it writes. I'm kind of a stickler with how a nib looks when it's finished. That's kind of one of my little pet peeves. I don't like seeing the grind marks and stuff like that where it looks very obvious that it was ground. So I try to make sure that mine look both clean and write well.
Thank you.
Kirk, as far as you know, has any nibmeister ever documented what they know into a handbook or a book for people who might be interested in this? I realize some people may want to be protective of what they know, but I'm just curious, has anybody done that?
Yeah, I think every nibmeister has a few secrets that they don't necessarily want to let go of. But that being said, I think Richard Bender put out a pretty good document on the basics of nibs and nib tuning and I think really that is kind of the most important thing. A lot of people are daunted by the idea of grinding a nib, but really tuning the nib is actually a more difficult process. So if you can understand geometry and kind of the principles of capillary action and stuff like that, then you can go ahead and you can make those custom shapes. It's when you now how do you eliminate these scratches and how do you make the nib write well on the paper and everything. That's where it gets challenging. So
Right.
So Richard Bender did has a few documents out there about that, and I highly recommend anybody who's interested in doing nib grinding to start there, kind of get a thorough understanding of tuning, because once you're there, you're kind of 90% of the way.
I screwed up. I think I told these guys in one meeting, I screwed up a Nakaya dorsal 2. I thought, oh, I can tune it, not tune it, but at least get it to write a little bit better. And to make a long story short, I got it from Singapore from FK at Aesthetic Bay, which I'm not even sure exists anymore. And so I had to send it back. They had to replace the nib. The shipping, as you can imagine, was quite expensive. It wound up costing me like $500 to correct that mistake. And I, you know, there was a time when I was younger, I might have attempted to learn how to do it. I was a dentist. We do small work, you know, but now I'm just going to be 63. I can't see that well. My hands don't function as well. But anyway, yeah, stay away from these points unless you know what you're doing.
I had a question. Kirk, you mentioned tuning, and I know there's a big difference between a custom grind and then tuning a nib. I have I have a few pins that Mike Green has sold, and he uses your nibs, and he says that he has you tune them. And I just wondered, could you explain what tuning means when you tune a? What do you do when you tune a nib that you ship to Mike or somebody else?
So simply put, tuning a nib is making the nib right the way it should have from the factory.
Okay.
You know, so basically, you know, making sure that the tines are aligned, making sure that the you know, that the ink is flowing through the nib properly, and you know, and putting that line to paper without being scratchy or anything like that. It should be a pleasant writing experience. So no change of the shape of the tipping or anything like that, unless there's, you know, on rare occasions there will be, you know, a mutilated tipping, you know, where one side is way bigger than the other, or, you know, factors like that where I would have to compensate for those, you know, in the tuning process. But the tuning just simply means to make it right the way it was supposed to from the factory.
Do you grade nibs when you inspect them, when you get quantities of them? Do you go through them and then grade them, which needs more than others? Like
I hand tune every single one, and what I notice is sometimes a nib can look absolutely perfect and write absolutely terrible. And sometimes it can look terrible and even be visibly out of alignment, and it can write really nicely. So, you know, there's no real simple way to just look at a nib and say, oh yeah, that one's going to write well. You have to put it to ink and put it to paper and verify those.
The only nib that I've gotten from Mike that was one of your nibs that is other than just a typical, you know, medium or fine or something like that has been one of your 1.1s stubs.
Yep.
And I've been told that I've got a very narrow writing angle, you know, when I hold a pen.
Okay.
And when you tune a nib like that and turn it loose, how do you select? Do you just kind of go middle of the road, what a typical angle is of a writer, or not?
Right. So, you know, generally speaking, I kind of, you know, most writers are in that 45 to 60 degree writing angle, you know, setting, you know, so there's definitely some exceptions. The people in the planner community that write with needle points and stuff, quite often they write up closer to 75 or 80, even 90 degrees. You know, so I kind of look at the nib. If it's an extra fine nib, I'll go ahead and tune it kind of more broadly. So going all the way from 45 to 90, whereas a stub, most people aren't going to write with that at a 90 degree angle. And so I'm going to tune that in the 45 to 70 degree range. So that being said, even when tuning, there's, you know, everybody, like you said, has a different writing angle. And so, and sometimes there's rotations and other factors involved. Sometimes it's the paper they're using that can create circumstances where even a nib that I've tuned may not still fit your hand properly. You know, that's one of the distinct advantages of getting the work done by me at a pen show. So I can see your handwriting, and you can verify right there and say, yeah, this is perfect, or no, we got to adjust this, this or that,
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some oblique nibs. Oblique whatever. You can make oblique pine, I'm sure they do, mediums, broads, double broads, whatever. Talk about oblique.
Okay. Yeah, oblique means that you're taking the two tippings, which are both a round ball, and you're taking one side and shaving it down. Well, you're shaving both sides, but you're shaving an angle onto the nib. And what that does is allows for you to rotate the nib and write with it rotated. It's one of the grinds that if you're new, or if you just starting out in the fountain pen world, I try to talk you out of it, because you get an oblique nib, now every other pen you own is not gonna write that well, because you're now focused on writing with a rotation. And so so then you got to either decide to oblique every nib you own, or so I tend to try to talk people out of it. But if that's something they really want, or they just want to play with one, or practice with one, or they already have everything else and they just that's what they want, then I'm happy to make that for them. One of the caveats of an oblique nib is that typically, in order for it to write really well, it also needs to be pretty wet. It's pretty rare that a dry writing oblique writes very nicely or very easily.
Something I need to ask on double broad nibs, and I have viewers that really get into double broad nibs. Is it difficult to transform a broad nib to a double broad nib? And so how do you do that?
So you can't make a broad into a double broad, technically speaking. You can only make
Cut your hair longer, right?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, we can. As a grinder, we're doing exactly that, grinding away material. So we're taking things that are bigger and making them smaller in some way. That being said, you can kind of create a bigger presence out of a nib by opening up the flow and getting more ink to the page. But that doesn't really necessarily transform it from a broad to a double broad, or from a fine to a broad, or anything like that. Just getting a little more ink on the paper.
I wanted to touch on something earlier with the obliques. All this stuff comes from the world of calligraphy, and the monks using quill pens back in the Middle Ages and stuff, and Renaissance period, where they would actually cut the tip of the quill to an oblique angle to make maintaining the angle of the pen easier for them if they're right-handed. Even with the italic nibs, that you look at a calligrapher who does Gothic Old English with the steel dip pen, they sharpen those things almost like a knife edge, because they really want those crisp lines. The problem is those 90-degree angles at the corner. Unless you're an experienced calligrapher, I don't do that kind of work. You'll wind up cutting into the paper, or they actually use sharpening stones to do this, Kirk. Sharpen it by hand, yeah.
So Kirk, here's one for you. And I guess I might be out of my league in asking this, but I'm going to ask it for myself and for a few others have asked it. Have you ever dealt with a feather dip pens, or just regular dip pens on the nibs? Are they difficult, or what's your take on that?
I have very, very limited experience with dip pens. I had one person sent me a very old gold nib dip pen, and that had been bent pretty badly, and I was able to straighten it out and get it writing okay. I don't know that it was writing the way it was originally made to write, but it's very difficult, especially they're so flexible with it, You know, and that's kind of one of the things is when you bend flexible nibs and when you grind flexible, all that stuff is just a whole other variable that's quite challenging to fix. So definitely be careful with your flexible nibs. I'll just say that.
So back to nibs again. If a person is on an extra fine nib and they want either a fine or a medium or a broad, can you also do that kind of work to adjust it to meet their needs?
So in order to make an extra fine and medium, the only way to do that is to retip, and that is not something that I offer.
Are they hard to do? Are they hard to do?
Well, I don't have the tools necessary to you know, weld the tipping material onto a piece of gold or steel.
Okay. By chance, do you give any classes on nibs?
Do I give any what on nibs?
Have a class on nibs. Like when you go to the shows or anything, do you give classes on them?
Classes. Do you give classes on
Oh,
nibs?
classes. At this point, I don't offer any classes. It's definitely something that's on my mind and something that I want to, you know, at some point start offering. You know, I don't want to. One of the things that I, you know, love about this community, and you know, especially the older people in our community have a huge wealth of knowledge, and I'm hoping that they have people or books that they're writing and passing down that knowledge that they have, and I want to, you know, do my part to do the same. Everything that I've learned and learning from the people that did it before me to, you know, to the things that I'm developing and doing, I ultimately want to pass that information down. You know, right now I'm just kind of very fledgling business. You know, I've been, like I said, I've been in business on my own for about 3 years now, and it's just, you know, so I'm still surviving this thing. So, you know, I think once you know, I've got my business well established and things going in the right direction, I can focus more on donating my time and knowledge to those endeavors.
Here's one. And now, Doc, if I'm not making any sense what I'm doing, maybe Doc can help us out on this one, because I think this is his cup of tea as well. Do you do any designs on your nibs?
So I do now have a fiber laser, and so I can now engrave logos and designs. Anything that, you know, you can, pretty much anything you can think of can be put on there. You know, I am not super versed in it. I can't, you know, my laser is capable of doing color, but I'm not capable of doing color yet. So, so, you know, but yeah, I can, you know, I have some nibs with my, you know, one of my nicknames is Nib Wolf, and so I have some nib wolves on my logos on my nibs.
So back to Doc for a minute. Doc, did I cover enough on that, or did you want to ask?
This is what he was referring to, Kirk, is I've had Jonathan Brooks laser engrave some of my gold nibs like this one here. It's, you know, what I like to do is I like to match the engraving to the theme of the pen. And so I've got some abalone inlaid pens, you know, the Rodden pens. That was for an owl pen. I've had an incredibly cute little Winnie the Pooh put on the nib. So that's people always seem very interested in that. And it didn't cost me much to have them do it, but and I guess you could do it on, you know, steel and maybe even titanium, and I don't know. But you got to be careful. The thing is too detailed; it blurs out. So,
right, that's right.
Okay, so is it very expensive when you do that?
Well, for me it is. The initial cost is quite expensive.
Oh, right, yeah.
To bring them, but you know, I can't charge somebody $60 to etch a logo on a nib. You know, that's not, you know. So I got to think in small scale and long term. So, you know, my pricing, you know, I haven't really put a whole lot of it out yet. It'll probably be very similar to Jonathan Brooks. You know, him and I are good friends, so we talk about this stuff. So, You know, one of the things I bring in Bach nibs that are blank, and so.
Oh, really?
So and then I sell them to guys like Mike Green and others, and so it makes sense that if I'm bringing in the nibs and I'm tuning the nibs and providing it to these makers, that I should also offer that that service where they can have their logos or their names or their brands on the nibs as well. So which kind of helps, you know, especially a lot of these guys don't have, you know, clips or other distinguishing features on the pins that can, you know, that can set them apart and make them known as their pins. It's one little thing we can do to help that.
And there are guys out there, like in this country, Tim Cullen does hand engraving on his nib.
Yes.
Mr. Cypress from Taiwan is actually now hand engraving their own nibs as well. The only thing that gives me the willies is how deep into the gold do they go?
Right.
You know, I've seen dip pens that have actually separated at some of the deeper lines. So
yes, yep, yeah. In fact, I recently had a Mont Blanc 146 come into my shop that the stamp where they had stamped the outline of the nib had actually stamped too deep and went through the nib. It was like probably a 1980s 146.
Ah, okay.
And so, you know, so even the pros, so to speak, can get it wrong when it comes to etching the nibs. So yeah, that's definitely something to consider, especially on gold.
When somebody sends you a nib and they want you to either tune it up or make the nib a different size nib, like, you know, a medium, they want it brought down to a fine, or they want it up to a broad. Do you, that's just an example, do you do a video with them and they'll show you how they write before you start anything?
You know, I started out doing videos and that was good. But I ended up, you know, kind of scrapping that just because I kind of got my name out there pretty quick and started getting a pretty long backlog. And so in order to try to keep things efficient, I stopped doing the videos so that I could, you know, get their work done and get it sent out faster. You know, I would love to be able to do that for everybody. And I think, you know, in some cases it helps, but I found that, you know, one of the reasons I scrapped it because 99% of the people just said, yeah, that's great. And not even sure they spent 2 seconds looking at it, you know, much less, you know, I think it's really hard to look at a piece of paper, even or a video of somebody writing and say, oh yeah, I wish it was a little bit wetter or a little bit drier, or is that a 1.1 line or is that a 0.9 line that you just put down? You can't tell that from a video or picture very often. So I felt like it didn't really do the service that I had, you know, that I was hoping to do for them. And so I do get, you know, probably 1 in 100 people do, you know, message me back after getting the pen and saying, well, it's not quite what I'd hoped for. And so, you know, we'd make that adjustment. I guarantee my work, they send it back. It is an additional inconvenience, of course, but overwhelmingly, you know, it's positive. And so I feel like it's, you know, kind of one of those things that's kind of comes with the territory, so to speak. I think even with the videos, I wasn't guaranteed to get the satisfaction that the customer's wanting just because they saw what looked nice on a video.
Kirk, these guys have seen this before, but I use this when I send a nib in from Mike Masayama. He knows how I write now. But you know, this depends upon how much pressure I use. Can I keep the pen at that rotation or angle? You know, sometimes as people are writing, especially if they're writing quick, the pen may rotate a tiny bit, and especially if they're doing flex work. I mean, sometimes people think in terms of flex, which is where I come from, the world of copper plate. You know, it's not just simply a downward pressure. it's also a rotation of the actual nib itself. You know, it's hard to take all that into account. And if you don't do a lot of writing or focus writing, I mean, I spent a lot of time on my writing technique, so I can pretty much duplicate it up to a point. But even when I came into the world of fountain pens again, I thought I had a light grip, but I did not. You know, I did not. You know, you're like chiseling into the paper. I've heard people do that. You know, on YouTube they demonstrate the pen how it writes you. It's like they grind. It's like they're doing the chiseling into the paper. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, yeah, all those details are important. When people send me pins or nibs to work on, I actually have a pretty long questionnaire that I have people answer questions like, you know, are you left or right-handed? How much pressure do you think you use? You know, and then I give, you know, little markers of, you know, things to think about. Do you write like you're writing with a paintbrush, or do you write like you're writing with a Sharpie? You know, kind of things like that, so that, you know, help give people idea of, you know, where to set themselves on that scale. So hopefully that I get it right. You know, but at the same time, just like that little graph you showed me, I had the most recent customer complaint I had was that they sent in and said, oh, I'm 45 degrees. And then and you know, so I tuned the nibs to 45 degrees, and they got them back and said, no, these are not right. They're scratchy. And I got them back, and I'm like, man, these feel great at 45 degrees. Can I see a video? And the person goes, here's the video. And they were showing, you know, here's my 45 degrees. And I'm like, well, and she goes, yeah, very, very specific. I'm very consistent at 45, right? Just like this. And
Kirk, I just put an image into the chat section you may be interested in. It's basically the protractor, but I have it in layered form, so it'll overlay an image. Let me just make sure I got the right one here. If you take that, and if somebody sends you a side shot of their hand, you can just simply do what I did. You put that in Photoshop and overlay it, and you can tell the exact angle that they're at, regardless of what they're claiming. That's the right one. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I just saved it to my file. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Mr. Kirk.
Right at that angle.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Joe.
No, it's fine. By the way, real quick, Kirk, have you ever worked on the Conklin Durograph? I just got this pen in. It's brand new. And I was under the impression it was number 6 Yovo. Well, my number 6 Yovo doesn't fit into it. My number 6 Bach doesn't fit into it. I thought maybe you might know what they have. It's called the Endura from Conklin.
Yeah, the Endura. It's a brand new pen.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they're claiming to use a Joe nib. Are you trying to swap the unit or just the nib itself?
Yeah, I was able to get the unit out, but I couldn't get my Yovo with the little owl on it into it.
Right. So to my knowledge, they're still using the Conklin threading. So they're still, and I think they're even still using the Conklin feed, but they now have a Joe nib unit, or the steel Joe nib in them. That's what they're saying. I can't, 100% verify. The easiest ones to tell are the units that are complete. I can look at a Joe feed and tell that it's a Joe nib, and that's actually the giveaway is the feed. The feed will tell you if it's a Bach or a Joe.
Yeah, it's a number 6. I can see a number 6 on there, but pretty pen, but without the gold, I don't want it.
You have a picture of it, Joe?
Well, what I got is this, Larry. It's like the Asvine that we talked about earlier. Not earlier tonight, but in earlier form.
Ah, I got you. Yeah, yes, sir.
Yeah, pretty pen, but
beautiful pen, yes. Yeah.
And Kirk, just so you don't know my background, but I'm somebody who thinks all nibs can write well. You can tune any of those nibs to write beautifully. But my choice for the pens I spend money on, I want a gold nib. It has nothing to do with how they write. In some cases it can be, like you mentioned, the Pelican M1000. It's a beautiful looking nib, but it's too springy for me. I prefer nibs that are like nails. when I don't want any flex to the nib or bendiness to it. So
I agree. I'm kind of a gold snob myself. I do have several steel nib pins, but but most of the time I prefer gold over steel, even if only just for the appearance and the aesthetic. Yeah, I mean, I have some Schaefer nails that are gold that are just fantastic.
Kirk, is there a difference between a more expensive pen and its nib to have it ground rather than a, inexpensive, more like a TWSBI or something from a medium to an architect or something?
So in the nib world, there's kind of I guess there's three basic brands of nibs. You've got Joe and Bach, and then you've got the custom makers that make their own nibs. The ones that make their own nibs are brands like Pelican and Aurora and Mont Blanc and such. So there's those guys, and then there's Visconti and Diplomat and Conklin and Leonardo and a thousand other brands that are all using Bach and Joe gold and steel nibs. So the overwhelming majority of those nibs are easily found and replaced, whereas when you get into the ones that are made by Pelican and Aurora and such, it's a much bigger ordeal as far as that goes. Now, as far as the and in the same breath, you've got different tipping material densities and stuff like that. Pilot makes their own nibs, and they are notoriously very very dense tipping and hard to grind. So they take more time, and but I think the converse of that is why the Pilot nibs are so renownedly smooth, because I think my personal theory as to why most nibs have feedback is that there's varying levels of micro pockets of air in the tipping that you can't even see, and so that those little gaps of air that you don't see translate to that friction in the paper, and so that creates the feedback field that it's renowned on sailors and platinums and auroras, and less so on Pilots and Mont Blancs and such.
Kirk, is iridium the primary tipping material that Yoho and Bach uses, or do they have other types of tipping material?
So iridium is an interesting thing. I don't fully know the whole history and the identification of iridium as a metal. Some people say that there's no such thing as iridium as a metal. However, that is the term that everybody uses for the tipping that they put on the tip of your nib, and so everybody technically has iridium on their nibs. But I think that those, iridium, as far as the tipping material itself, is generally speaking a compound of nickel and platinum or palladium and various other
iridium is just kind of a general term that everybody
It's a general
uses.
term for a bunch of hard alloys that are combined to make the tipping material.
Back to you, Mr. Kirk.
So
when you're out and about in the, you make certain stores, you make any stores, you make, is it Drugos? Is that how you pronounce it? Drumgos. You make them. I see you there quite a bit. I guess your hangout or something. Just a joke.
Yeah, I mean, it's, Drumgos and I have formed a good partnership that works well for both of them and me. One of the big benefits of having me in a store is that store's customers are getting immediate service for things that they would normally have to wait a long time for, or would have an unknown cost, or not even know who or where to send such a thing to. And so it's a huge benefit to both of us. It helps me be known and helps me take care of their customers, while also their customers are getting that additional level of service from their store. So it's been a huge benefit to both of us. So I go there every 4 to 6 weeks, as basically as much as I can stand. I guess they want me there all the time, but I
Do you, by
I
chance,
have a family and I'm trying to keep them too. Sorry.
do you go to Pen Boutique store at all, or have you been there yet?
Which Pen Boutique?
Pen
Yes,
Boutique.
I did an event for Pen Boutique last December. We haven't set a date for the next one, but I'm sure there'll be another one. Either later this year or something. And then I'm going to go to Oblations Papers in Portland in a couple of weeks, and then also working to go to shop in North Carolina. And there's a lot of other stores that are out there that I'd be happy to help support them and help keep their customers
When you're at a pen show, Kirk, is there a long wait time for people to get nibs repaired?
No, the way I set it up is that I have time slots, and so you can sign up in advance for a time slot and or walk in. So I sell half of my slots online, and the other half slots are reserved for walk in. And so you'll either reserve the time that you want to come in, or you'll walk in and pick a time that's available. And so whenever that time comes, it's your turn. And so at 10 o'clock or 8:30 or 4:15, 4:30, whatever, everybody gets a half an hour slot. And so everybody knows what time to come and see me. So there's no waiting around, so to speak. I mean, occasionally, one will run a little longer, or one will go faster than the other, and I'll have either a gap and I can help those that are on standby, or their service will take just a bit longer. But generally speaking, I'm able to help hold to that half an hour timeline.
Kirk, what's the most high-end pen you ever worked on?
Probably the Namiki Golden Rose.
Did you get nervous handling the pen, anything like that?
I definitely am cognizant of the fact that if I mess up that nib, it's going to be hell to pay, right? So I definitely keep that in mind. But I ultimately, I think I treat them all the same. I treat them all as irreplaceable, and so I think I have a pretty good method and technique to ensure that mistakes are minimized or eliminated altogether.
There's a music repair company based out of Boston where I've seen this video where they were doing repairing a Stradivarius violin. Imagine, and what they do is literally crack the top off. They insert a little wedge and twist it, and the top pops right off. Imagine handling something like that.
No thanks. No thanks. Yeah. I have several customers that have sent me. I've done probably 100 David Oscarson pens.
Oh yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Are they as gorgeous in person as they look like online?
They are gorgeous in person. If you've seen a Fabergé egg, it's kind of that's what they are in a pin shape, and just phenomenally beautiful.
Wow, those are amazing looking pens. That would be my Grail pen, but that wouldn't be ever landing in my pen case at all. That's just way out of my league.
Okay. I understood.
What pen is that again? What's the name of that pen?
David Oscarson.
Okay, I got you.
There's a gentleman who's an attorney on Tony Rostici's other channel, the Kansas City Pen Club, And he has an entire collection of them. He's pulling out one after another.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like literally must have pulled out around 10 of them. Maybe he has more, I don't know.
Yeah. I know a couple guys that have at least, 30 plus in their collection.
Holy.
And, I've done several grinds for David Oscarson himself, so it's a lot of fun.
David, if I remember correctly, Mr. Announcer and I went to the Dallas Pen Show once, and I believe he was there, and I finally got to see his pens, and they are a work of art. They're beautiful pens, and he has his case, and he was at the end of between these two tables, and so I went over there. Real nice guy, real friendly, and talking about his pens, and I asked him, could I see one? I didn't mean to hold her, and just he said, sure. He took it out, and I said, how much is this pen? I don't know, 6,000, 8,000. I forgot what it was. It was like, so I kind of set that back down because I don't want to end up eating it. Beautiful pen, just gorgeous pen. It's a pen. If I had the money, I'd have one, maybe two.
Yeah, one pen is my salary for a year.